The firelight flickered against the curved walls of the alien banquet hall, casting strange shadows that danced along the organic architecture. The air carried a metallic tang, mingling with the earthy aroma of roasted alien delicacies, a feast designed to honor the conquerors of humanity. The aliens sat in grotesque grandeur, their elongated forms hunched over the obsidian table, their chittering laughter cutting through the silence like shards of broken glass. Each creature, clad in iridescent armor, radiated an aura of predatory elegance. At the far end of the hall, separated from the alien elites by an invisible line of servitude, stood humanity's delegation. 5 humans, dressed in the tattered remnants of their former glory, were presented as both guests and curiosities. Captain Elias Grange, the leader of the group, stood at the forefront. His sharp jawline and weathered features hinted at a resilience that had not been dulled by years of servitude. To his left, Dr. Nadia Reyes, the team's linguist and cultural analyst, shifted nervously in her boots, her keen eyes scanning the room. The other 3, a wiry engineer named Taro, the gruff pilot Briggs, and a quiet but formidable soldier named Delaney, stood in stoic silence. "Eat," hissed the host, a towering alien called Zartan. The words were translated through the cold, mechanical tones of a biosonic implant. Zartan's mandibles twitched as he gestured toward the spread of alien dishes. "Consume what you fear, humans. Show us your resilience." Elias exchanged a glance with Nadia. The meaning was clear: this wasn't a feast, it was a test. The centerpiece of the table was a dish the aliens called the flare fruit, a molten-looking orb that pulsed with an eerie, fiery glow. It was said to contain volatile compounds capable of igniting internal tissues if consumed incorrectly. To the aliens, it was a delicacy reserved for the bravest, or the cruelest. "Captain," Nadia whispered, her voice barely audible. "Their word for this translates loosely to fire that devours. If we refuse..." Elias nodded grimly. To decline would be seen as weakness, a flaw the aliens would exploit to reinforce humanity's subjugation. He stepped forward, his boots echoing against the crystalline floor, and reached for the flare fruit. The aliens fell silent, their glowing eyes narrowing as they watched. Elias lifted the fruit, its heat prickling his palm, and brought it to his lips. A faint, acrid scent filled his nostrils as he bit into the outer layer. His vision swam for a moment, the taste of violent explosion of heat and bitterness. But he did not flinch. One by one, the other humans followed suit, each suppressing their reactions as the fiery essence of the fruit seared their throats. The aliens watched with a mixture of amusement and disdain, their chittering voices speculating on how long the humans could endure. When the last bite was consumed, Elias placed the hollowed shell of the fruit back on the table. He looked directly into Zartan's multifaceted eyes and forced a smirk. "Not bad," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "Got anything spicier?" The room erupted in alien laughter, a discordant cacophony that reverberated through the hall. Zartan's mandibles clicked in what could have been a grin, or a warning. "You amuse us, Captain," he said. "Perhaps there is more to your species than we believed." "Perhaps." After the feast, the humans were escorted to their quarters, a sterile chamber carved from the same organic material as the rest of the alien structure. The guards stationed outside ensured there would be no escape, but escape wasn't on Elias's mind. "We don't have much time," Elias said, gathering his team around a small table in the center of the room. "That wasn't just a show of bravado back there. That was a message." Briggs, leaning against the wall, crossed his arms. "Yeah? And what message was that?" Elias met his gaze. "That we're not broken. Not yet." Taro fiddled nervously with a piece of alien tech he'd pocketed during the feast. "It's great that we didn't die eating that fireball, but what's the play here, Captain? We're deep in enemy territory." Elias turned to Nadia. "How long do you think we have before they grow bored of us?" Nadia frowned. "A few days, maybe. Their culture values spectacle. If we don't entertain them, we're just fodder. Then we make our move before they lose interest," Elias said. "Taro, what's that thing you're playing with?" The engineer held up the device, a small, glowing sphere that pulsed faintly. "Some kind of power cell," Probably low grade. Picked it off one of the serving bots. Elias nodded. Think you can rig something with it? Taro's eyes lit up. I can try. What are we aiming for? A distraction? A weapon? Both, Elias said. If we're going to turn the tables on these bastards, we need to hit them where it hurts. Nadia's eyes widened. You're not seriously suggesting? Elias cut her off. We need to show them that humanity isn't just here to survive. We're here to fight back. The next morning, Zartan summoned the humans back to the banquet hall. This time, the atmosphere was different. The aliens were more animated, their laughter sharper, their movements more restless. Something had shifted. Our scouts report strange disturbances on your homeworld, Zartan said, addressing Elias directly. Pockets of resistance. Flares of defiance. Futile, of course. But intriguing. Elias's expression remained neutral. Humanity doesn't go down without a fight. Zartan tilted his head, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Then perhaps it is time to test the limits of your defiance. With a wave of his elongated arm, Zartan summoned a servant carrying a tray of smaller flare fruits, each one glowing more intensely than the last. The aliens' chittering grew louder, their excitement palpable. This, Zartan said, lifting one of the fruits, is the ember core. Few of my kind have ever dared to consume it. Will you? Elias stepped forward, his team watching in tense silence. He reached for the fruit, his hand steady despite the heat radiating from its surface. But this time, as he bit into the fiery flesh, he wasn't thinking about survival. He was thinking about the makeshift device hidden beneath his sleeve, Taro's handiwork, a modified power cell rigged to overload on command. Elias chewed slowly, his eyes locked on Zartan. Not bad, he said, his voice laced with defiance. But I've had better. The alien's laughter was cut short as a low, ominous hum filled the hall. Zartan's mandibles twitched, his gaze darting toward the source of the sound. The device beneath Elias's sleeve began to glow. You wanted a spectacle? Elias said, his voice rising. Let me show you what humanity does with fire. The hum became a roar as the power cell detonated, flooding the room with blinding light. Chaos erupted as aliens scrambled for cover, their chittering replaced by panicked shrieks. Elias turned to his team. Move! Now! They bolted for the exit, the world around them ablaze with the fire they had once feared. The air was thick with tension as the humans darted through the twisting corridors of the alien structure. The light from the explosions still danced in their retinas, and the acrid scent of scorched alien materials filled their nostrils. Alarms blared, a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the organic walls, casting eerie shadows in the dim, pulsing glow. Taro clutched a makeshift device strapped to his forearm, his eyes scanning for any incoming signals. They'll be swarming us in minutes, he said, his voice shaky but focused. That stunt you pulled, Captain, definitely got their attention. Elias led the group, his posture rigid as his sharp gaze cut through the dim corridor ahead. Good. Let them come. If we can keep them chasing us, it'll buy us time. Time for what, exactly? Briggs growled, bringing up the rear with his plasma pistol drawn. We don't have a map, we don't know the layout, and we've got an army of bug-eyed psychopaths on our tail. Time to find their core systems. Nadia interjected, her breath short but her tone steady. The translation logs from last night mentioned a nexus chamber. If we can disrupt that, we might cripple their ability to coordinate. Elias glanced back at her, his expression grim. You're sure about this? Nadia nodded. As sure as I can be without reading their minds. The way their society operates, everything revolves around centralized control. Take out the nexus, and they're vulnerable. Then that's where we're going, Elias said, his tone brooking no argument. They pressed on, their boots thudding against the soft, alien flooring. The corridors seemed to close in around them, the organic material pulsing faintly as if alive. It wasn't long before the sound of chittering and the rhythmic clatter of clawed feet echoed behind them. They're coming, Delaney muttered, her grip tightening on her rifle. Her calm demeanor belied the tension etched into her features. Fast! Elias raised his hand, signaling the group to halt at an intersection. He studied the branching pathways, then pointed to the one veering left. That way. Taro, can you set another trap? Taro nodded, his fingers working quickly as he crouched near the corridor's junction. From his satchel, he pulled a pair of salvaged power cells, connecting them with wires stripped from the alien architecture. This won't stop them for long, Taro warned, his hands trembling slightly as he placed the device against the wall. But it'll slow them down. It just needs to hold until we're out of range, Elias said. Let's go. They sprinted down the left corridor, the hum of alien technology and the faint vibrations of pursuing soldiers urging them onward. Moments later, the trap detonated. A deafening boom echoed behind them, followed by the sharp cries of Groth soldiers caught in the blast. The group emerged into a massive, open chamber that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. Bioluminescent tendrils hung from the ceiling, casting an eerie glow over the space. In the center of the room stood an enormous, pulsating structure, its veins coursing with a faint orange light. This has to be it, Nadia said, her voice filled with awe and trepidation. The Nexus. Taro stared at the glowing structure, his engineering instincts kicking in. That thing's pumping out energy like crazy. It's got to be the heart of their operations. Which means it's also their weakness, Elias said. Taro, can you rig something to overload it? Taro hesitated, his eyes darting between the Nexus and the limited supplies in his satchel. Maybe. But it's gonna take time. You've got 5 minutes, Elias said, his tone leaving no room for debate. Delaney, Briggs, set up a perimeter. Nadia, help Taro. I'll cover the entry. The team moved into action. Delaney and Briggs positioned themselves near the chamber's entrances, their weapons aimed at the shadows. Nadia crouched beside Taro, her quick hands assisting with connections and calibrations. Elias stood near the main entrance, his rifle trained on the corridor they'd come from. The chittering of approaching Groth soldiers grew louder, their silhouettes flickering in the faint light. They're here, Delaney warned, her voice steady. A lot of them. Hold your fire until they're in range, Elias ordered. We need to funnel them. The first wave of Groth soldiers burst into the chamber, their elongated limbs glinting in the orange light. Plasma fire erupted as Delaney and Briggs opened fire, their shots precise and unrelenting. The Groth faltered but quickly regrouped, their hive link driving them forward in relentless waves. Taro, how much longer? Elias shouted, firing a burst into the advancing horde. 3 minutes, Taro replied, his voice strained as he worked feverishly on the overload device. Maybe less if I don't blow myself up in the process. You don't have 3 minutes, Briggs growled, throwing a grenade into the cluster of enemies. The explosion sent Groth soldiers sprawling, but more took their place. Delaney's rifle clicked as her magazine ran dry. She switched to her sidearm, her movements fluid and efficient. We're getting swarmed, Captain! Elias gritted his teeth, firing shot after shot into the oncoming waves. Hold them! Just a little longer! At the Nexus, Taro and Nadia worked in frantic synchronization. Sparks flew as Taro connected the final wires, his hands moving with practiced precision. Got it! Taro shouted, his face breaking into a grim smile. Overload set. When it blows, this thing's going to light up the entire structure. Nadia looked at the glowing device, her expression a mixture of relief and fear. And us with it if we don't move. Then let's move! Elias barked. Fall back! Now! The team began a fighting retreat, firing as they moved toward an auxiliary exit. Taro activated the timer on the overload device, its ominous countdown ticking loudly in his ears. 60 seconds! Taro shouted as they ran. The Groth, sensing the threat to their Nexus, surged forward with renewed ferocity. Their chittering cries filled the chamber, their clawed feet pounding against the floor. Delaney fired a burst into the horde, her expression calm despite the chaos. We're not gonna make it at this pace. We will, Elias growled. Keep moving! The team burst through the auxiliary exit just as the timer hit 0. A deafening explosion rocked the structure, the force of the blast throwing them to the ground. The walls trembled, cracks spreading like veins through the organic material. The Groth soldiers froze mid-charge, their hive links severed by the destruction of the Nexus. Their movements became erratic, their once coordinated assault devolving into chaos. Elias pushed himself to his feet, his ears ringing from the explosion. "Everyone up! We're not done yet!" The team stumbled into the next corridor, their breaths ragged but their resolve unbroken. Behind them, the Nexus chamber collapsed in a cascade of molten debris, the light from the explosion casting long shadows in the corridor ahead. As they pressed on, Taro looked back, his expression a mix of exhilaration and disbelief. "We actually did it." Elias glanced at him, his expression hard but not unkind. "Don't celebrate yet. This was just round 2. The Groth aren't going to take this lying down." Nadia nodded, her face pale but resolute. "We hit them where it hurts. Now we have to survive the backlash." Elias led the way, his rifle held at the ready. "Let them come. If they want to see what humans are made of, we'll show them." The team pressed deeper into the alien structure, their path lit by the fiery remnants of the Nexus. For now they had won. But the battle was far from over. The air around them was suffocating, thick with the acrid tang of smoke, and the metallic scent of alien technology burned beyond recognition. The explosion that had ripped through the Nexus chamber was only the beginning. The Groth Hive ship now shook with instability, its once precise hum of energy disrupted by the humans' sabotage. The corridors pulsed with crimson light as emergency systems activated, and the faint sound of the Groth's frenzied movements echoed from every direction. Captain Elias Grange led his team through the labyrinthine halls, his rifle raised and his sharp eyes scanning for threats. The walls seemed alive, twitching and pulsing as if the ship itself were reacting to the destruction. Behind him, Taro clutched his tools like a lifeline, his breath ragged as adrenaline coursed through him. Delaney and Briggs flanked the rear, their weapons ready, while Nadia kept pace beside Elias, her face pale but determined. "They're disoriented," Nadia whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant alarms. "The Nexus was their central hub. Without it, they'll struggle to coordinate." "Good," Elias replied, his tone clipped. "We'll use that to our advantage." The team rounded a corner and entered a wide corridor, its walls lined with strange, glowing glyphs that seemed to ripple with energy. At the far end, a group of Groth soldiers emerged, their movements erratic and disjointed. Unlike their earlier encounters, these aliens didn't move with the same eerie precision. Their hive link had been severed, leaving them to act as individuals, something they were clearly unaccustomed to. "They're still dangerous," Delaney warned, raising her rifle. "Don't underestimate them." Elias nodded. "Hold your positions. Let's see what they do." The Groth soldiers hesitated for a moment, their glowing eyes scanning the humans with a mixture of confusion and rage. One of them let out a guttural roar, a sound that reverberated through the corridor like a battle cry. It charged forward, claws extended, and the others followed in a chaotic wave. "Open fire!" Elias barked. The corridor erupted into chaos as plasma fire lit up the darkness. Delaney and Briggs unleashed a barrage of shots, cutting down the lead Groth soldier before it could close the distance. Taro ducked behind a support column, his hands shaking as he fumbled to retrieve a makeshift grenade from his satchel. "Cover me!" Taro shouted, his voice tinged with panic. Elias stepped forward, his rifle spitting precise bursts of plasma that tore through the advancing Groth. "You've got 5 seconds, Taro!" With trembling hands, Taro activated the grenade and lobbed it down the corridor. It landed among the aliens and detonated with a blinding flash, the concussive force sending the Groth soldiers sprawling. The team used the momentary chaos to push forward, their boots pounding against the floor as they moved past the disoriented enemy. "Keep moving!" Elias ordered. "We can't afford to get bogged down." The team pressed on, their path lit by the flickering red light of the ship's failing systems. The sound of distant skirmishes echoed through the halls, other Groth soldiers clashing with their confused comrades, their once perfect unity shattered. The team reached a narrow passageway that opened into a massive chamber. The space was dominated by a towering structure that seemed to pulse with raw energy. Streams of liquid light flowed through organic conduits, converging at the base of a massive core that hummed with unstable power. "This must be the power center," Nadia said, her voice filled with awe. "It's keeping the ship operational." Elias's eyes narrowed. "If we take this out, the whole ship will go down." "That's a double-edged sword," Briggs said, his tone grim. "We're still on this thing, remember?" "We don't have a choice," Elias replied. "If we leave this intact, they'll rebuild." "Taro, can you rig something?" Taro approached the power core, his hands trembling as he studied its intricate design. This is beyond anything I've worked with before. But yeah, I think I can overload it." "You've got 10 minutes," Elias said. "Make it happen." The team spread out to secure the chamber. Delaney and Briggs took up defensive positions near the entrances, their weapons trained on the shadows. Nadia assisted Taro, her quick hands helping to connect wires and calibrate the device he was assembling. The power core pulsed ominously, its unstable energy casting eerie patterns across the chamber. Elias paced near the center, his rifle ready, his mind racing. He knew they were running out of time. The Groth might be disoriented, but it wouldn't last. They would regroup, and when they did, they would come for blood. "Taro, status?" Elias called out. "Almost there," Taro replied, his voice strained. "This thing's got enough juice to light up a planet. If I screw this up..." "Don't screw it up," Elias interrupted. The first wave hit like a tidal force. Groth soldiers poured into the chamber, their disjointed movements replaced by a frenzied desperation. They moved with raw aggression, their claws slashing through the air as they closed in on the team. "Contact!" Delaney shouted, opening fire. Plasma bolts streaked across the chamber, cutting down the first wave of attackers. Briggs hurled a grenade into the advancing horde, the explosion scattering the aliens and buying the team precious seconds. "They're adapting," Nadia warned, firing her pistol into the fray. "Even without the hive link, they're learning." Elias fired a burst into the nearest Groth soldier, his shots precise and unrelenting. "Hold them off!" "Taro, how much longer?" 2 minutes!" Taro shouted, his hands a blur as he worked to complete the overload device. The team fought with everything they had, their weapons blazing as the Groth pressed closer. Delaney switched to her sidearm as her rifle ran dry, her shots taking down 2 more soldiers before they could reach her position. A Groth soldier leaped toward Taro, its claws aimed for his back. Nadia intercepted it, driving her blade into its chest and kicking it away. "Stay focused, Taro!" she shouted. "I'm trying!" Taro snapped, his voice cracking under the pressure. The device emitted a low hum as Taro connected the final wire. "It's done!" he shouted, stepping back from the power core. "This thing's gonna blow in 90 seconds. "Then we're out of time," Elias said. "Fall back! Everyone move!" The team began a fighting retreat, their weapons blazing as they pushed through the waves of Groth soldiers. The power core behind them pulsed erratically, its unstable energy filling the chamber with a deafening roar. The corridors shook as the overload began to take effect. The walls cracked and splintered, molten streams of alien material spilling onto the floor. The Groth soldiers faltered, their desperate charge interrupted by the chaos. "Keep moving!" Elias shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. The team reached a junction, their path ahead blocked by a collapsed section of the corridor. Elias glanced back at the advancing Groth soldiers, then turned to Taro. "Options?" Taro pointed to a ventilation shaft overhead. "There! It should lead to the hangar." "Go!" Elias ordered. "Briggs, give me a boost!" Briggs hoisted Taro into the shaft, followed by Nadia and Delaney. Elias and Briggs held the line, their weapons firing in unison as the Groth soldiers closed in. "Captain?" Nadia shouted from above. "We're in!" Elias nodded to Briggs. "Go! I'll cover you!" Briggs hesitated, then climbed into the shaft. Elias fired one last burst into the horde before pulling himself up, the heat from the approaching explosion searing his skin. The team crawled through the narrow shaft, the sound of destruction growing louder with every second. Behind them, the Groth Hive ship began to collapse, its systems consumed by the chain reaction triggered by the overloaded core. They emerged into the hangar just as the explosion reached its peak. The team scrambled into a small Groth shuttle, its controls flickering erratically as the ship's systems faltered. "Get us out of here!" Elias shouted, strapping himself into the pilot's seat. Briggs powered up the engines, the shuttle shuddering as it lifted off. The hangar erupted into flames as the ship accelerated, the team watching in silence as the Groth Hive ship disintegrated behind them. Elias exhaled, his hands gripping the controls. "We did it!" Nadia slumped in her seat, her face pale but relieved. "For now." Taro let out a shaky laugh. "That was insane." Delaney leaned back, her rifle resting on her lap. "And it's not over. They'll come back." Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. "Let them. We'll be ready." The shuttle sped into the void, leaving the shattered remnants of the Groth ship behind. For the first time in years, humanity had struck a blow that couldn't be ignored. But the battle was far from over. The fire had been lit, and it was only the beginning. The shuttle drifted in the vast expanse of space, the hum of its failing engines a grim reminder of the battle they had just survived. Inside, the team sat in tense silence, their breaths still labored, their bodies bruised and battered. Outside, the remains of the Groth Hive ship floated in jagged shards, its destruction visible even against the backdrop of countless stars. Elias Grange leaned back in the pilot's chair, his hands gripping the controls. He stared at the wreckage, his jaw tight and his eyes unreadable. They had dealt a devastating blow to the Groth, but at what cost? The ship's destruction had only bought humanity time, and time was a currency rapidly running out. Briggs broke the silence, his voice gruff. "Engines are barely holding. We won't make it far." Elias turned to Taro, who was already crouched by the control panel, his hands moving frantically. "Taro, tell me we've got options." Taro wiped sweat from his brow, his voice shaking as he replied. "We've got life support for maybe 12 hours. Engines are another story. I can try to boost them, but we'll need somewhere to land before this bird falls apart." "Somewhere to land?" Briggs growled. "We're in the middle of Groth-controlled space. Somewhere to land isn't exactly in the cards." Delaney leaned against the wall, her weapon resting on her lap. "The Groth are disoriented, but that won't last. We've crippled their hive ship, but the fleet's still out there. They'll be hunting us." Nadia, sitting near the shuttle's navigation console, spoke up. "If we can get to a coalition relay point, we might be able to send a message to Earth. Warn them about what's coming." Elias frowned. "And draw the Groth straight to Earth?" "No. We've already done enough to paint a target on our planet. We can't risk leading them there." "What about an abandoned outpost?" Taro suggested. "The Groth have left plenty of scraps from their occupation. Maybe we can find one and regroup." Elias nodded, his resolve hardening. "Do it. Find us something, anything. But make it quick." As Taro worked on triangulating a potential destination, the shuttle's sensors beeped. A red light blinked ominously on the control panel. Nadia leaned closer, her face tightening as she read the data. "They're coming," she said, her voice low but steady. "Multiple Groth vessels closing in. They've already picked up our trail." Elias's hands tightened around the controls. "How many?" "3, maybe 4," Nadia replied. "And they're fast. We won't outrun them," Briggs said, his tone grim. "Not in this heap." Elias's mind raced. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and nearly out of time. But surrender wasn't an option, it never had been. He turned to Taro. "What's the status on the engines?" Taro shook his head. "Still unstable. If I push them too hard, we're looking at a meltdown." "Push them anyway," Elias ordered. "We need every second we can get." Taro hesitated, then nodded, his fingers flying across the control panel. The shuttle groaned as the engines surged, the vibrations rattling through the cabin. "They'll catch us within 10 minutes, Nadia warned. "What's the plan?" Elias stood, his voice sharp and commanding. "We don't fight them head-on. We use their arrogance against them." Delaney raised an eyebrow. "Arrogance?" Elias nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "They've always underestimated us. They see us as weak, disorganized. Let's give them a reason to believe it." The shuttle veered toward a derelict asteroid belt, its jagged rocks orbiting a dead star. Elias piloted the ship with precision, weaving through the debris as the Groth vessels closed in. The team braced themselves as the ship lurched and groaned, the engines straining against their limits. "Why the asteroid belt?" Briggs asked, his tone skeptical. Elias's smile widened. "Cover. Confusion. And a whole lot of chaos." The Groth ships entered the belt moments later, their sleek, angular forms cutting through the void like predatory birds. Plasma bolts streaked through the debris field, narrowly missing the human shuttle as it darted between the rocks. Delaney opened the shuttle's rear hatch, her rifle at the ready. "You better have a damn good follow-up, Captain." "Trust me," Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Taro, get that decoy beacon ready." Taro pulled a small, cobbled-together device from his satchel. It pulsed faintly with blue light, emitting a signal designed to mimic the shuttle's signature. "It's not perfect, but it'll hold their attention." "Good enough," Elias said. "Deploy it." "Now." Taro activated the beacon and tossed it out of the hatch. It drifted into the debris field, its signal drawing the attention of the nearest Groth ship. The alien vessel turned sharply, pursuing the decoy as the human shuttle veered in the opposite direction. "One down," Briggs muttered. 3 to go. The second Groth ship pressed harder, its weapons tearing through the asteroid field in an attempt to pin them down. Elias pushed the shuttle's engines to their limit, weaving through the debris with desperate precision. "Brace yourselves," Elias warned. "This is going to get rough." The shuttle shot toward a massive asteroid, its surface riddled with craters. Elias angled the ship sharply, skimming the surface before diving into one of the larger craters. The Groth ship followed, its plasma cannons firing relentlessly. Taro's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, the engines can't take much more of this." "Just hold together a little longer," Elias replied. "That's all we need." As the Groth ship closed in, Elias brought the shuttle to an abrupt halt inside the crater. The pursuing vessel didn't have time to adjust, its momentum carrying it into the asteroid's surface. The resulting explosion sent a shockwave through the debris field, scattering rocks and sending the human shuttle spinning. 2 down, Delaney said, her tone grimly satisfied. Elias steadied the shuttle, his hands firm on the controls. "Let's finish this." The final 2 Groth ships closed in, their movements more cautious after the loss of their comrades. The humans had proven to be more resourceful than expected, and the aliens were adjusting their tactics. "They're learning," Nadia said, her voice tense. "We won't fool them the same way twice." Elias's expression hardened. "Then we change the game." He steered the shuttle toward the edge of the debris field, where a massive asteroid drifted, its surface fractured and unstable. "Taro, can you trigger a chain reaction?" Taro's eyes widened. "You mean blow the whole thing?" "Exactly," Elias said. "Can you do it?" Taro hesitated, then nodded. "If I can tap into the power cells, I can rig something. But we'll need to be clear of the blast zone fast." "Get to work," Elias ordered. Taro scrambled to assemble the makeshift device, his hands moving with frantic precision. The Groth ships drew closer, their plasma cannons firing sporadically as they closed the distance. "Almost there," Taro muttered, sweat dripping from his brow. "Just a little more." "Hurry," Delaney urged, firing a few suppressing shots toward the approaching ships. "Done!" Taro shouted, holding up the device. "It's armed!" Elias grabbed the controls, pushing the shuttle's engines to their breaking point. "Deploy it and hang on!" Taro launched the device toward the asteroid's surface. The team braced themselves as the shuttle shot away, the engines screaming in protest. Seconds later, the device detonated. The asteroid fractured, then erupted in a blinding explosion. The shockwave tore through the debris field, consuming the 2 remaining Groth ships in a cascade of fire and molten rock. The shuttle rocked violently, alarms blaring as it was thrown clear of the blast. Elias wrestled with the controls, steadying the craft as the debris field faded into the distance. Silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the hum of the failing engines. "Is it over?" Taro asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elias exhaled, his grip on the controls relaxing. "For now." The shuttle limped toward a distant outpost, its systems barely holding together. The team sat in silence, their exhaustion palpable. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, but the cost weighed heavily on them. Elias looked out at the stars, his expression unreadable. "We sent a message today," he said quietly. "One the Groth won't forget." Nadia nodded, her gaze distant. "And one we'll have to live up to." Elias's voice hardened. "We will. Because this fight isn't over. Not by a long shot." The shuttle disappeared into the void, carrying humanity's defiance, and its hope, into the next chapter of the fight for survival.